the number one overall pick in the NBA draft doesn't guarantee a superstar. Yes, we have seen some great players come out of this, some of the best players of all time. But also, with the first overall pick, we have seen many teams draft players that just would not pan out, especially within the past 10 years. We have seen many players, including guys like Greg Oden, Anthony Bennett, even guys like Markelle Fultz or DeAndre Ayton, who may have not lived up to that number one overall hype. But within the past few years, we have seen a number one overall pick bring his team to the playoffs in only his second season. After winning Rookie of the Year in his first season, he would continue to improve in his second season and bring his team, the Orlando Magic, to the playoffs. Now, this player is Paolo Banchero, which we obviously all know about, but I feel like he is not being talked about enough, and especially with the hit rate with the number one overall pick not being as high as you would expect, there have been some points in this season where I think he's getting a little bit disrespected and not talked about enough in the media. So today, we're going to be talking about the most disrespected number one overall pick in the NBA right now, Paolo Banchero, and how he brought the Magic all the way to the playoffs and maybe potentially even a contender in the East next season. Now, like I said, the number one overall pick in the draft doesn't guarantee you a superstar or even a star player sometimes. Now, we have seen some good stretches of players go back-to-back in back-to-back drafts, but we also have seen spots where maybe the first overall pick hasn't lived up to the hype. Guys that I mentioned earlier, like Anthony Bennett, who obviously was a bust. After that, Andrew Wiggins, who was an interesting player because, yes, he did have a decent career up to this point, but number one overall when there were better players in that draft. I wouldn't consider him a bust since he did end up going on to have some pretty good seasons, especially with the Warriors later on, but he wasn't the number one overall pick that the Cavs had hoped for. Guys after that include Karl Anthony Towns, who has been great throughout his career, and then Ben Simmons in 2016, Markelle Fultz in 2017, and DeAndre Ayton in 2018. At one point, Ben Simmons was one of the better two-way players in the NBA, becoming an all-star, looking like he was going to be the next superstar in the league, but obviously we know how that's played out. Markelle Fultz, another instance drafted by the 76ers in back-to-back drafts where hasn't been able to pan out yet in his career. And then DeAndre Ayton, who has put up decent stats, but really has not lived up to that number one overall pick, especially with the players in that draft that were drafted after him. There have been other instances too within the past few drafts, specifically guys like Zion Williamson, who he's been good, but he has struggled to stay on the court so far. And then there have been other guys too that we have seen, but we haven't had enough time to really develop into maybe superstars yet. Guys like Anthony Edwards, who are already becoming a superstar in his own right, and Cade Cunningham as well for the Pistons, and obviously Victor Wembanyama last year, who we already know is going to be one of the best players in the league, has proven that up to this point. So let's talk about Paolo Banchero. In only a second season, he has solidified himself as a star in the league, making the All-Star game last season, which, in my opinion, in your second season, if you can make the All-Star game and continue to improve, especially after winning Rookie of the Year in his rookie season, I think he officially is a star in our league now. Not up to that superstar level yet, but definitely at least a star. Last year continued to improve on pretty much everything in his game, especially his three-point percentage. The main knock people had on him in his rookie season is he was a little inefficient, especially from three, shooting less than 30%. Last year, he proved everyone wrong with that, getting up to nearly 34% from three, which is pretty decent, especially at his position as well. And for a guy that's not really much of a three-point shooter, only averaging about 4 shots per game from deep, he's able to get to the rim though and be pretty efficient, as his effective field goal percentage did go from 46.5% last year, or 2 years before, in his rookie season, up to 49.7 last year. So another increase as well. Pretty much everything across the board. He went up, was more efficient last year, able to put up more points as well, and that's why he got his All-Star spot last year, and it also helped his Magic have the 4th biggest increase in win percentage last season, something that was a little bit overlooked. In his rookie season, he did well. The Magic were in a spot where they were really in that weird bubble in the East, which we see a lot of teams in right now, it seems like, where they're not good enough necessarily to be a playoff contender every year, but they're not bad enough to get the number 1 overall pick. So maybe they're not a team like the Pistons where they're going to be consistently bad, it seems like, year after year at this point, but maybe they'll be able to bring it back up. But they're not exactly in the higher echelon of those teams like the Celtics and the Sixers and the Bucks who are contending. They're more in that role right now, which we see with teams like the Bulls and even the Hawks, where they're in the play-in spot every year, but they haven't been able to get past that. So instead, the Magic went out, Paolo got better, this team overall got better, and they had a 41% win rate in his rookie season, last year getting up to 57%. A very big increase, the 4th highest in the league last year, right behind the Timberwolves, the Thunder, and the Rockets as well. Timberwolves and Thunder obviously both contending for a championship last year as well, so in pretty good company. And yes, that is definitely thanks to Paolo Banchero, who was putting up some pretty good stats last year and continuing to get better, and it seems like he's only going to get better as well. Besides just putting up more points per game, he was also dishing the rock out as well, going from 3.7 assists his rookie year up to 5.4 last year, putting up a very impressive stat line with nearly 5.5 assists, 7 rebounds, and 22.6 points per game, which is fantastic as a second-year player. So the thing that intrigues me the most about this team going into next season is the addition of KCP to this team. Now, we've seen what he can do in the past, and I'll link the video right up here if you haven't watched it too as well, a video about KCP in the past. But as we know, he was able to be a big contributor on the Lakers back a few seasons ago when they were able to win the championship, and obviously as well when he was on the Nuggets and they were able to win a championship. So it's not like he's not going to have an effect on this team. I think he's actually going to have a very big effect on this team because he knows how to play his role very well, and he's going to be able to go in there and kind of be that leader and veteran guy where a lot of these players are very young on this team as well. When we look at this starting lineup, we have Wendell Carter at 25 years old, Franz Wagner at 23 years old, and KCP is going to be the oldest one in this starting lineup at 31 years old. Jalen Suggs at 23 as well, and obviously Paolo Banchero is still very young at this point at only 21 years old. So he's going to help this team in a few various ways. Obviously being able to go in there and shoot the ball very well and be a very consistent role player for them, but also being that veteran, being able to bring this team together as well. And it's something that is going to be very interesting to look at because I feel like it hasn't been talked about enough. I feel like this Magic team just in general hasn't been talked about enough because last year being able to go into there in the playoffs and Paolo Banchero just being a fantastic player and continuing to improve as well. The East is still pretty open in my opinion. I'm not sure if they'll be able to obviously compete for a championship next year, but they're going to be able to go out there and at least be able to compete to win in the first round as well, and maybe be a sneaky team to go out there and get things done. I mean, they have all the players that they need at this point. Maybe they go out there at the middle of the season and maybe get another guy to go out there and fill a role. But when we look at this team, they have some pretty good depth across the board. Now, yes, they did lose in the first round last year against the Cavs, but they went out, they pushed it to 7, and every single game was pretty exciting. I mean, the first few games, obviously losing both on the road was tough. But then they come back at home and win those next 2 games. They lose in Cleveland, they win at home, and then they lose in Cleveland again. So they weren't able to get it done and win on the road. Neither team was able to win a road game, which was pretty interesting in that series. It was almost like we knew who was going to win in every single instance. But Paolo Banchero going out there in some of these games, 24 in the first game, 21 in the second, 31 in the third. 39, 27, and 38 to close out this series as well. He did a very good job. Also 16 rebounds with that 38 points in Game 7, even though they lost. But I think this team is going to be able to compete next year, at least to make it to the second round, which, again, Maybe you're not competing exactly for a championship next year because there's a lot of teams with better rosters in the East right now, but you can continue to improve. And as long as these players continue to improve, Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero going to be a pretty good duo next year as well. I mean, Wendell Carter is going to be a good enough option for them as well too. Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony, Anthony Black, some very young guys too as well in that point guard rotation. And KCP, like I said, going to be able to bring in this veteran presence. But specifically Paolo Banchero. This is a guy who could be competing for an All-NBA team next year. If he continues to improve and put up great stats, I don't see why he's not going to be able to go out there next year and compete for an All-NBA spot. So in the end, we'll see exactly what happens, but I do think he's going to be able to go out there and at least compete for third team, maybe second team. Who knows? He could have a fantastic season and help bring this team far in the playoffs and make a big run. This team is very young, but also a spot where they have some very good players, because we see a lot of young teams maybe go out there and not be great at the beginning because they don't know how to mesh well together. It seems like this team is meshing very well as they were able to get it done. But overall, I think this team could definitely compete next year. And let me know down below what you guys think about this team and specifically about Paolo Banchero. I'll see you guys in the next one.